Hey guys, ggDoA back. I know it's been a long time since I've done a video about some of the Hearthstone Whispers of the Old Gods cards, but since I got back from APAC Winter in LA, my voice has been kind of messed up. I've had like a pretty bad cough, and because of that, I haven't been able to record any videos like I wanted to because I just would have been kind of coughing the entire time, which wouldn't have been great. So thanks for kind of bearing with me. Sorry again for the long delay. But I'm back. I'm gonna do kind of a long video about all the cards that have been announced since my last one, and there's quite a few, so this is gonna be a longer one, but it should be fun. I might still cough a little bit. I apologize in advance if I do. I'll try to avoid it, but yeah, I just didn't want to wait anymore. So let's jump right into it. Without much further ado, we're gonna start with the Druid cards, and I love this card, Mark of Yasharaj. Like, when I was playing WoW, I always called him Yasarj, but I guess that's wrong. I guess it's Yasharaj, so we'll just refer to him as that from now on. But anyway, this is a great Druid card. 2 mana to give a minion +2/+2, and if it's a beast, draw a card. I really like that. It harkens back to the good old days of Magic the Gathering. You had stuff like Giant Growth and all that just simply buff minions, but this is even better because it works with that beast synergy that Blizzard has been trying to push for a couple releases now, through cards from expansions, through stuff from the adventures as well. Blizzard really wants Druid to be to have a beast-centric part of it, kind of like Hunter does too, I guess. So it's cool. I love this card. I think it's great value for the mana. I think the draw engine that you can get out of it is awesome. So I think Beast Druid decks certainly seem like something that could certainly be viable in Whispers of the Old Gods, and this is going to be a card you're going to put 2 of in every single beast deck you make. So yeah, I think it's a great card, and I'm definitely going to use it. So let's move on to Mire Keeper, 4 mana for 3/3, and I should specify too that this is kind of, it's not really my first impressions on these cards. I've looked at them before, but I haven't really had time to think about them a whole lot, honestly, so this is kind of the first time that I've really sat down and thought about them. And I like to do videos like that because I like to kind of give you my very first impressions as far as like my first real thoughts about the cards. Because I don't know, I just think it's kind of cool. But anyway, 4 mana for a 3/3. Pretty standard as long as the value is there. Choose one, summon a 2/2 slime, or gain an empty mana crystal. And honestly, both of these seem like pretty good things. You either get 5/5 worth of minions on the board for 4 mana, which is good value. The fact that it's a 2/2 slime makes it harder to clear from, you know, paladin dudes or warrior whirlwind effects or mortal coil or all that stuff that you usually have to worry about if it's a 1 mana minion that you get out of a lot of stuff like this. So I like that initially. Or the gain an empty mana crystal is interesting too. I feel like people are going to lean more towards the 2/2. Because when you're into turn 4, when you're starting to play your 4 mana minions, you want to be getting a little bit more for the mana than just an extra mana crystal next turn. Just like you don't see a ton of people ending up being happy about playing Wild Growth or something on turn 4. It's just it's coming a little bit late for ramp. You know, you already want to be putting out those ramped minions by turn 4, turn 5, and all that. So yeah, I think there's certainly situations where it's going to be used, but I see this and I kind of want to lean a little bit more towards the slime side, I think, in most games, because when I look at this card, I think of, you know, Druid mid-range, not in the way we know it, but not in the like combo-centric way we know it, but sort of in a way that takes board control more like a normal mid-range deck, like a Zoo Warlock might, or a mid-range Paladin might, you know, where you get value on the board through the minions you're playing. Rather than just ramping up huge stuff like you see with the current mid-range druids. So I think it's an interesting card. I am not totally sure that it's going to be used a lot. I think this one's honestly right on the edge, and I think it's going to depend a lot on how the meta looks after GVG and Nax Fallout, after the classic cards are changed. So we'll put this one as tentative. We'll put it on the watch list. I think people might use it, but I'm not 100% sure it's going to be a big card, you know what I mean? Alright, let's move on. Moving into the Hunter cards. Infest, 3 mana. Give your minions Death Rattle, add a random beast to your hand. That's That's pretty cool. That's pretty great. I again, like, I'm not sure how viable this card is going to be competitively, but it seems good. It seems good because we know Piloted Shredder is dropping out of the meta. Obviously, it's going away with GVG, and if you have a decent early game with 3-4 minions on the board by turn 3, that's asking a lot, isn't it? But like, you 2 or 3 minions by, say, like turn 4 or 5 or something, and you play like this with your hero power, or this with like another smaller minion or something. I feel like it kind of does fill in some of that gap that Piloted Shredder left, where you might not be getting something on the board immediately, obviously, but you're going to be getting a decent amount of stuff in your hand, and if you're running a beast-centric hunter deck, it's going to be something that's probably pretty valuable. And I haven't gone back and looked through what all is going to be left over as far as beasts go for this next set after, again, GVG and Nax fall off, after the classic cards are changed. But it's certainly an interesting card, and it's certainly one that's worth playing around with, I think, too. I think this, more than anything else, this expansion and this changing of the classic cards that they tell us is going to happen is going to really, really change a lot of the options for different classes as far as what style of deck you can play. And I think this is going to be one of the cards that you're going to really want to take a look at if you're going to want to build something really different with Hunter. I'm definitely going to be experimenting with it. I'm definitely going to be experimenting with pretty much everything, but this is a card that's particularly exciting to me. So, Infest, I think it's cool. Good. I like a lot of the cards in this set, actually. Bestial Group Shout. I'm going to zoom in on this one a little bit because it was kind of small. So 8 mana, summon all the animal companions. So we were thinking about it, you get Huffer, so you get a 4/2. You get Misha, you get the 4/4 with Taunt. And you get Leok, which is a 2/4 that buffs. So the other thing to keep in mind is that Huffer will be 5/2, Misha will be 5/4. They're going to both get that buff from Leok as well. So it's interesting. I mean, it's expensive, obviously. It's 8 mana. That's still cheaper than paying for 3 animal companions by 1 mana, obviously. And you know what you're going to get. So this could be the kind of card, too, where you try to develop a larger board with beasts, and then you play this and you get automatically the Leok buff on whatever else you have on the board, whatever other 4 minions, theoretically max, because this brings out 3, so you want to do it when you have 4 minions. But it also gives you that 5 damage Huffer right off the bat. So this could add up to a decent amount of late game burst damage for Hunter, I think, depending on what you have. If you had, because let's see, so it's essentially 4 damage for other minions if they're all, beasts out there, right? So it's, so I think it could be good. Again, I think when you look at this kind of card, you have to think about Hunter being played a very different way than it is now, which is what I'm hoping is going to happen, that we're going to get to see classes, especially Druid and Hunter, get to play it in a very different way than we see them played now. And so if you have kind of a more slower, board-centric, like mid-range Hunter, but more an extreme sort of version of mid-range, a little bit maybe more spell-centric than the current versions are, I think you could see this kind of deck be played. So we'll hope anyway. I mean, you get Infest, you get Beasts, you get a lot of stuff out, you play Bestial Group Shout. It's exciting. I think it's neat. And more than anything, I think the cards in this set are just going to really shake up how classes are played, which is good. So moving on to the Mage cards. Kabbalist Tome. 5 mana. Add 3 random Mage spells to your hand. Mage seems to be getting a lot of randomness this set from the cards that they've released. We're going to see more, in the future here, but in the future of this video anyway. But it seems like there's a lot of add a random spell, add a random minion kind of thing. So it's an interesting direction to take Mage. As I take a sip out of my Leroy Jenkins mug. That's right. I'm kind of going Leroy on these card impressions. And to me, I mean, you know me, I'm not always a huge fan of randomness, per se, where you get a random spell, get a random minion. That like is off-putting to me a little bit because I want to control what happens in my games. But that said, the fact that you get 3 cards for 5 mana, and they're all spells, so that could be useful in a lot of different decks, I think is pretty exciting. So this is a card that's definitely going to be worth some experimentation. And I haven't gone back, obviously, through and looked at all the mage spells that are going to be available and like what percentage of those are going to be, you know, theoretically viable in various situations. But the fact that you get 3 new cards in your hand, 3 new spells for 5 mana, seems good. It seems pretty good. Just because it's a way to, again, shake up your opponent. It's a way for them to have a harder time making good decisions in the game because they don't really know what you're going to bring out. It's a way for you to kind of turn games around. So I think we're definitely going to see this played. I don't know if it's going to stick around competitively, but it's worth a shot, that's for sure. Let's move on. Faceless Summoner, 6 mana for a 5/5. Battlecry summon a random 3-cost minion. So you could get King Mukla out of this. You could get another 5/5, you know, or you could get Jeweled Scarab. You could get a 1/1 too. So there's a wide range, obviously, of minions. And again, you know, I mean, this is obviously a card that's going to take some statistical analysis to really see if it's worth it or not. 5/5 for 6 mana has been the standard for a while now, ever since Sylvanas got nerfed from 5 for 5/5 to 6 for 5/5. And so again, it's probably going to be worth playing, but I think this one isn't quite as appealing as the last card we saw, adding those spells to your hand. This one, I'm not sure, because the thing is, the 6 mana slot for a lot of classes, there's a lot of good 6 mana neutral minions. Obviously, Sylvana is great, Emperor Thaurissan is great, yeah, Lothab's falling out. He's not 6 mana, but you get the idea. When you play a 5/5, you want to get something substantial from it, right? Especially the 6 mana slot for a 5/5. And I'm just not sure that Faceless Summoner gives enough value to do that. So I don't think we're going to see this one get used a lot, but I could be wrong. Again, it depends on the 3 mana minions that are going to be coming out of it, but I think this one's going to fall by the wayside a little bit. So let's move on. Servant of Yogg-Saron. 5 mana for a 5/4. Battlecry casts a random spell that costs 5 or less. Targets chosen randomly. So again, you know, Mage seems to be all about random stuff happening this expansion, which is interesting. I saw a little bit of analysis on this. I think Trump did some, if I remember right. That roughly came out to about half the time something is going to be good for you if there's nothing else on the board. And I think it jumped up to a higher percentage if there was a minion out, if I remember right too. So theoretically, and I haven't looked at the stats myself obviously, it seems like this is mostly going to be a good thing. It could also be a very bad thing. 5/4 for 5 seems kind of, seems a little bit lackluster. Just because at the point in the game where you're playing 5/4 minions for 5 mana, that 4 health is not going to be great for sustaining. You're not going to get to keep that creature around very much. So that spell's going to have to do something good to make it worth it. So it's risk reward. You know, do you want to take that chance of having something randomly happen good or not? You know, probably not. Again, this is a card that, you know, I think might see play, but I'm really hesitant about, you know, but maybe it could just be my own bias too against like random things happening. Like I said, I immediately balk at seeing cards that say something random happens that you can't control. You know, I've never been a big fan of that, so I'm always going to rate those cards a little bit lower just on my own personal bias. So I'll leave room for this card to be possibly used, but I don't think it looks that great to me. That's just my opinion. Moving on to Paladin cards. Steward of Darkshire, 3 for a 3/3. Stats for mana, I like that. Can't beat 3 for a 3/3. Whenever you summon a 1 health minion, give it Divine Shield. That's pretty exciting, honestly. If you're familiar with Magic the Gathering, White Weenie was a deck archetype that was played for a long time, which was where you would just summon a lot of really cheap creatures that interacted well with each other, that you could buff or protect with spells that were in your deck as well too. And with the Paladin hero power, with the other stuff that's come out for Paladin, you really kind of get that same impression from cards like this, is that that's kind of the direction where Paladin is kind of going. And I kind of like that. You know, I like the idea of Paladin being sort of this military general that leads the forces of the light, you know, of course. So you're going to have a lot of small underlings working under you, right? If you're this Paladin general, if you are, you know, Uther, right? So I think it's cool. I think it's funny that this card is coming in when Hobgoblin is going out. Obviously, Hobgoblin works off of 1 attack minions, not 1 health minions. But this is something that you could synergize, you know, with that sort of thing. So it's going to be interesting to see how people work this into various decks. I mean, I think Leper Gnome with Divine Shield is pretty awesome. Please don't nerf Leper Gnome Blizzard. It doesn't need a nerf. It's fine. Leper Gnome is a great card, and you should not touch it. It's awesome. But that's a different story. But anyway, this is a card that I get excited about because I like aggressive, cheaper kind of decks. So I'm definitely going to be messing around with this one. Should be fun. And even stuff like, you know, Jeweled Scarab is going to benefit from this too. Let's see. What else? Well, I shouldn't be trying to think of all the 1 health minions while I'm doing a video. That's just wasting time. But you get the idea. I think it's going to see some use. I think it's pretty cool, and I think it's a way for Paladin to kind of have that aggro, flood the board kind of archetype, which it's going to need a little help with because obviously Muster for Battle is going away, Shielded Minibot is going away, so they're losing some of those early game options, and maybe this could kind of help out too. Yeah, we'll see. I like the card though. I like the concept of it. Now for the legendary, I guess, from Paladin, Ragnaros, Light Lord. 8 for an 8/8. At the end of your turn, restore 8 health to a friendly damaged character. So minion or yourself will be healed by this. Kind of like a big old light well that hits you for 8 damage. Again, you know, this isn't like the regular Ragnaros where you can't attack. This is an 8/8 body that your opponent does need to be afraid of. And it could be big too because this is a substantial heal that your opponent can't avoid. You know, there's ways where you can play this card that you're going to get that heal no matter what, right? So being able to put an 8/8 body on the board and heal for 8, it's almost similar a little bit to a slightly cheaper Alexstrasza. If you fall below 15 health, a lot of times you're generally not healing for more than 8 to bring yourself back up to 15. So it's kind of like that 1 turn earlier, but you get that heal every turn. It's interesting. It's interesting. So I think in a lot of decks you're going to see this run alongside of Tyrion probably, and with Dr. Boom thankfully falling out of the competitive meta, especially in Paladin decks, this is going to be, I think, a go-to card for any sort of mid-range or later sort of deck that's going to give you a big swing in that it puts a large threatening body on the board, and it also potentially heals yourself for quite a bit and keeps you in the game. You know, or you hope it doesn't just heal your, you know, I don't know, Keeper of Alderaan for 1 health or something like that. But it's an exciting card. I think it's going to be good, and I think it's going to see a lot of use. And on a side note, I think it's cool that Blizzard is sort of experimenting with the lore a little bit too, because while Hearthstone is based in WoW lore, obviously, it doesn't necessarily need to be strictly stuck in the WoW lore that's already happened. I like that it's kind of sort of creating its own take on things too, which is cool. I hope we see more of that. That's neat. Vilefin Inquisitor, another Paladin card. 1 for a 1/3. Battlecry, your hero power becomes summon a 1/1 Murloc. I love this. I love this card so much because tribal decks are something that have always been really, really fun. And I reference Magic the Gathering a lot. I've been playing it since 1994, so it's a big part of my card game identity, I guess you could say. And so a tribal deck, if you're not familiar with that term, is a deck that's based on 1 creature type or 1 minion type, if we're talking in Hearthstone terms. So that's, you know, Murlocs, dragons, what have you, right? Demons. So this is great, man. I mean, obviously awesome synergy with Murloc War Leader, that kind of stuff. And I love it. I think it's great, and I can't wait to build Murloc decks with Paladin and play around with this card, because the fact that you can change your hero power to summon yourself a Murloc every turn, that's exciting. That's really cool stuff. So I think for a Murloc deck, it's fantastic. It's going to be in every single Paladin Murloc deck. Obviously, you're going to run 2 of them. And if you're not playing a Murloc deck, you're not going to use it. But that's the point. It's a Murloc card, right? So that's cool. Let's move on to the Priest cards. 4 mana for Shadow Word Horror. Destroy all minions with 2 or less attacks. So obviously a direct card focused at owning Murlocs. Obviously it's in the picture, but also owning any sort of hyper aggro deck, any sort of face deck basically that's going to be playing a lot of those cheap minions. And it's also kind of a direct counter to that Paladin card we saw a little bit earlier. I'm going to go back to it. Steward of Darkshire, obviously. It's going to make problems for that card too, because even if you have the Divine Shield on those minions, they're just going to get rocked by Shadow Word Horrors. So it's something to think about. And I like this kind of tech card, this sort of option that you have. if you see a lot of X on the ladder, you can, as a priest player, you can be like, okay, I'm going to put this in and get some use out of it. So it's going to be a card you're going to include based on the meta, but it's potentially a very valuable card in that regard. So it's cool. I like classes having options like this, and I think it's a great card for priest. So yeah, that's about it. Kind of looks like the Murlocs are getting sucked into the Tobelstein too, the Zarya ultimate from Overwatch. I wonder if we're going to see that someday in Hearthstone. Nah, probably not. But a guy can dream. Anyway, Embrace the Shadow. 2 mana. This turn your healing effects will deal damage instead. Wow, talk about an OTK card right here, man. I mean, I know Blizzard is sort of like wanted to avoid things that enable OTK decks, but then they put a card like this in the game. Obviously, somebody's going to find a way to break this card. It's a card that is just built for combo decks, obviously. You figure out a bunch of healing stuff you can do, you slam this down, and you absolutely rock your opponent for like 1,000,000 damage. This card will be broken. This card, and I'm not saying it's broken by itself, but I'm saying somebody will make a deck that makes this card really, really strong. So as far as a card that is a likely candidate for nerfing or changing out of this set, I think this may be one of the primary ones. There was a deck way back when in early beta that was based around pretty much OTKing your opponent with healing via like your healing turned into damage. Because there was a card, I believe it was just Greater Heal way back in beta, that you healed yourself heal for 2 for each card in your hand, I believe it was. So people would play essentially, mill decks basically, where they would fill up their opponent's hand, and then they would play that with Aknai Shadow Priest out, and it would do 20 damage to your opponent. You just like destroy them. So I think this could end up being similar. We already know there's some pretty strong combos with Aknai based on Zombie Chow, which is actually going to be gone now, which is interesting. And Flash Heal, which... Is Flash Heal going to be gone? Why am I forgetting what set Flash Heal is from right now? Hold on, I'm actually going to Google this. Because I'm like really disappointed that I'm forgetting what set Flash Heal is from. Flash Heal. Let's see. That's from GVG. It's not. Okay, it's not. Good. That's what I thought. Okay, I thought it was from TGT, but I wanted to make absolutely sure it is. So Flash Heal Aknai is still going to be an option. Obviously, Zombie Chow is going to be gone. But there's other choices too. There's Corrupted Healbot now, which we looked at earlier, which heals your opponent for 8, or does 8 damage to them in this particular case too. So again, even though Zombie Chow is gone, this is still a card that could potentially result in a lot of damage done to your opponent, especially with something like Velen's Prophet Velen, right? So we'll see how this one works out. But again, this is a card that people will build a deck around. Absolutely, it's exciting stuff. Let's see. Alright, so Rogue card. 2 mana for a 2/2 Undercity Huckster. Death Rattle, add a random class card to your hand from your opponent's class. Okay, interesting. So it's like a little bit of a thought steal. I suddenly feel like I did this card already in another video. Oh, who knows? It's been a while. I'm just kind of making it happen, right? But I think it could be good. I think putting a 2/2 down early on for 2 mana, getting a card out of it that could potentially be, something that swings the game, or at least something annoying your opponent has to deal with that they aren't expecting to deal with. I think it's good. I think in some more aggressive, tempo-based or mid-range-based rogue decks, you're going to see some use out of this guy. Either way, it's a card I like. I like cards that put a good body on the board for the mana cost. 2/2 for 2 is great. And it also gives you more stuff. So, yeah, it just seems like a solid rogue card. Zarl, Poisoned Mine, a rogue legendary. 4 mana for 3/2, Battlecry and Death Rattle. Add a random toxin card to your hand, which is cool. Kind of reminds me of the poisons that rogues get in World of Warcraft, where you apply specific poisons to your weapons that do different things. And so I have the poisons right here. Let's look up for it. So again, 4 mana for 3/2. And here's the poisons. So we have Blood Thistle Toxin. They're all 1 mana spells, obviously. Return a friendly minion to your hand. It costs 2 less, so essentially you Shadow Step for 1 mana. Briarthorn Toxin, give a minion +3 attack. Fade Leaf, give a friendly minion stealth until your next turn. Firebloom Toxin, deal 2 damage. Kingsblood Toxin, draw a card. So these are all good cards. These are all like stuff that you definitely would generally want to be doing, and obviously there's some randomness in it, but they all seem useful. Every single one of these seems to be pretty useful. You know, even something like Blood Thistle Toxin, you could, you know, use to return a charge minion to your hand. You could use it to, you know, return like a, you know, Earthen Ring Farseer, get a little bit more healing. There's a lot of value you can get out of it. Fire Bloom, you know, 2 damage for 1 mana, that's great. Give a minion stealth. These are all useful things, so I'm excited to see how people are going to end up using Zarl Poisoned Mind here, because I think the Toxins are, you know, legit good cards, and although you don't get the greatest body for 4 mana on the board, the 2 spells you get out of it could end up making a difference. So I think it's a card that's going to be played around with, a card that's going to be used. The Toxins seem good enough, so let's move on to Shadowcaster. 5 mana for 4/4. With the battle cry, choose a friendly minion, add a 1/1 copy to your hand that costs 1 less. So, or that costs 1, I'm sorry, that costs just 1 mana. So pick any minion on the board that you own, and you get a copy of that. That's a 1/1 for 1 mana. So this is a really interesting card, actually, because it's I can see a lot of ways, obviously, that this is going to be pretty useful. Right away, my mind jumps to Lothad, but Lothad's going to be gone out of standard, so we're not going to get to see him. But, you know, you could see something like Emperor Thaurissan get copied. You could even see something like, geez, Ragnaros late game, but that'd be kind of hard to set up for. But, you know, more importantly, you could see something like Nerubian Egg, maybe. That'd be a valuable copy to have, because it'd be a Nerubian Egg that could attack right away and die faster, so you get that 4/4 quicker. There's just a lot of cards that this could be useful for. You know, even something like SI7 Agent. You know, getting a 1/1 for 1, that's just basically a 1/1 and 2 damage for 1 mana if you combo it out. So this is a card that seems pretty useful, and the stats aren't bad for the mana. 4/4 for 5 it's okay, you know, depending on what you copy. So this is definitely a card that you could build around in a deck and make to be pretty useful. Like, even if you copy the last card we saw, Zarl Poisoned Mind, a way to get more of those toxins too, right? So yeah, I think it's definitely a card that could be used, and I think it's kind of a cool idea on the sort of Faceless Manipulator concept. It's neat. Thistle Tea, a 6 mana spell for Rogue. Draw a card, add 2 extra copies of it to your hand. So it's expensive, obviously, but you do get 3 cards out of it. You end up getting 3 of the same cards, so it may or may not be useful depending on what you draw in what situation. But this is a card that you could see, yeah, I could see maybe adding 1 of in a deck, or maybe even 2, depending on what you had coming, right? I mean, this is a card that you'd play a little bit later, when you had a pretty good chance of, or a pretty good knowledge of what was left in your deck, what you could kind of get out of it. So, I think it's a pretty decent card. I like the idea of it, but it's something that could definitely backfire on you too, right? But in general, I think it's going to be pretty good. So probably going to see maybe 1 of these used in some rogue decks. Again, it's really, really hard to predict what's going to be standard and not standard after the expansion comes out, after the classic card changes happen, just because we don't know all those changes and we don't know all the rest of the cards. So it's really hard to like start thinking about building decks right now, because you just don't know what you're going to have to work with in the first place. But just basing these cards on their face value, this looks like a card that I would probably run 1 of in a deck to try it out. Yeah, so let's move on. But I don't play a lot of Rogue in general. Moving on, Shaman, Thing from Below, 6 mana for a 5/5 taunt, costs 1 less for each totem you've summoned this game. And so that's pretty exciting. And this is also, it works with totems that are summoned from your hero power, I believe. So it's a card that could get pretty cheap, pretty fast. Totems that come from Tuskar Totemic should apply into this as well. So it's just another way for mid-range Shaman to build a board to survive longer, and I think it's just a solid card. We'll probably see, you know, 1 or 2 get run, depending on if totem-centric decks become popular. But even if it's not a totem-centric deck, this could still see a little bit of use in kind of a more mid-rangey sort of shaman. So yeah, I think pretty solid card. Hammer of Twilight, 5 mana for 4/2, Death Rattle, summon a 4/2 elemental. Interesting stuff. It's a little bit more expensive. If you think about a True Silver Champion, that's 4 mana for a 4/2. This is 5 mana for a 4/2. But when you get that Death Rattle, theoretically on turn 6, I guess it would be, because you know, assuming you'd attack the first turn you play it, and then you attack the next turn to clear minions or whatever, you're going to get that 4/2. And 4/2s get cleared pretty quickly, but the nice thing is that 4 attack, if it's traded with buy a minion of your opponent, you're probably going to get something out of it. You're probably going to kill another minion. So essentially, unless this 4/2 elemental is killed with a spell, you can sort of think of it as like a third charge to this weapon attack that you don't need to pay health to use, essentially. Where it's another way to trade with a minion where you don't need to take damage doing it as if you were attacking in with a weapon. So again, it seems pretty good, and I think Shaman's getting a lot of exciting mid-range to late-game options this set, and I think this is going to be one that's worth using. So yeah, cool card, again, and just kind of really different idea that you get a minion out of a weapon when it dies. Pretty neat. And speaking of neat, 5 mana for a 4/6, Halaziel the Ascended. Whenever your spells deal damage, restore that much health to your hero. Wow, that seems extremely strong, doesn't it? If we're talking about later game deck, especially if you're looking at something like maybe a control-oriented shaman, which I think could actually be viable in this set now, based on some of the stuff we've seen, like the last card we took a look at. This is going to be a card that you know, save and then play with a little bit of direct damage, right? And geez, like, think about this with Lightning Storm. Man, if you play this on turn 8 and they have like a decent board, that's going to be potentially a lot of health you're going to get back, because it's whenever your spells deal damage, and so that's damage to minions, that's damage to players. So I'm thinking of it in terms of using it with like board clear, using it with like Lightning Storm or something, because obviously with like, you know, Lightning Bolt or Lava Burst, you're going to be gaining 3 health or 5 health. But thinking about the board swing that this would produce in a Control Shaman deck with this and Lightning Storm is really, really exciting. So yeah, I think this card's absolutely a must include if you want to run any sort of later game control-oriented shaman. I'm going to be giving it a try because it looks really cool. And if they can't get rid of it quickly, which is sometimes kind of tough with a 4/6, this card could be like a game winner, essentially. So I think it's a great legendary card. I think it's a really cool concept for Shaman, and I think it's going to definitely see some use. Yeah. Moving on to Master of Evolution. 4 for a 4/5. Transform a friendly minion into a random one that costs 1 more. So it's interesting. Again, it's random. ggDoA doesn't like random. But it's mitigatable. It's probably going to be more positive because you're turning it into a card that costs 1 more. So in theory, on surface value, you're going to be getting something a little bit better, hopefully. So yeah, this is a card that's probably going to be used, I think, because again, the important thing with this card is that you're also healing, quote unquote, a minion you already have. So in again, you know, in a more control oriented or a mid-range shaman deck where you're using your minions to trade, you know, you trade with one of your minions, you kill one of theirs, you get your minion down to 1 health, then you play this guy on it, and you ideally, probably most likely, turn that minion from a minion that's nearly dead to a minion that has more health, better stats, maybe even a good effect on the board too. So I think this card is great, and a 4 for 4/5. I mean, it's a Chillwind Yeti Utopia benchmark, right? It's 4 for 4/5. It's great stats for the mana, so I think this looks like a good card. I think in general, Shaman's getting really good cards in this set, and yeah, Shaman's going to be a class to watch for sure. Exciting stuff. So, moving on to Warlock cards, I guess. Doom, 10 mana, destroy all minions, draw a card for each. It's pretty exciting. It's pretty expensive, too. 10 mana. I mean, we've already got Twisting Nether for 8 mana, right? That destroys all minions. You don't get anything from it other than the fact that the board is clear. This way you draw a card for each. So, in a late game shaman situation, not shaman, I'm thinking about shaman, a late game warlock situation, it could be a way to refill your hand and clear the board, kind of get a start back over again. But there's a couple things to consider with this card too. One is that if you're facing a late game state where there's a lot of minions out and you need to clear the board to survive, you may actually be kind of hurting yourself at the same time by drawing like 4 or 5 cards, right? Because if we're talking late game, you're getting yourself closer to fatigue. If you're Warlock and you've been using life tap to draw cards throughout the game, you've already been taking some damage. So it's a double-edged sword for sure. Drawing cards can be good, but because it's so expensive, you're going to be playing this in the late game, and that means that you might be really genuinely worried about fatigue when using this card. So, I mean, obviously it's can be very good, but I think there's situations where you put this deck in your deck, or you would put this card in your deck, and you get to that situation where you could play it, but you've only got like 6 cards left in your deck, and you're like, oh great, if I play this, I'm fatiguing next turn, you know? So it's a very big risk-reward card, which is kind of the idea with the Warlock class anyway, is hurting yourself for gain, right? You know, sacrificing something to gain something. That's sort of the Warlock way, right? So it fits in with the Warlock class concept for sure, but as far as usefulness, maybe one in like a late game Warlock deck, a late game control Warlock deck we could possibly see, but I'm a little bit hesitant about it because of the 10 mana cost. Obviously, I don't think you could make this card cheaper than 10 mana, maybe 9, but 10 mana is probably the right cost for this kind of effect. But again, I'd be a little bit worried about fatigue situations if I was playing this in a real game situation. So something to think about, but certainly an interesting card. Moving on, Renounce the Darkness. 2 mana. Replace your hero power and Warlock class cards with another class's. The cards cost 1 less. So this is really crazy, man. I mean, because this is like Golden Monkey levels of changing your deck, basically. Because you can essentially become a new deck, become a new class, and on the surface it's like, that doesn't sound that good because I don't know if I'm gonna get the hero power I want or the class cards I want for the right situation, but the cards cost 1 less, so you're gonna kind of get that Emperor Thaurissan effect on everything class related in your deck from then on, and that could be a huge difference maker and make all that stuff that maybe isn't as great that you get from those other classes really good. So it's a crazy card. It's definitely going to be used. I don't know about its competitive viability. Obviously, it seems like too big of a risk to take in a tournament situation, because you're totally rolling the dice with this one, because you don't know what class cards you're going to get. Yeah, they're cheaper, but you just might get complete crap. Who knows? So I think it's going to be a really fun card to play with. I can't wait to use this in a deck, but competitively, I'd be pretty nervous about putting this card in a deck, so it's going to be interesting to see how this one turns out. But either way, it's a cool card. I like the concept, and not every card that's made has to be competitive, right? There's cards that should be fun. There's cards that should make you want to build a silly deck around it that's just for fun. Like one of the decks that I love playing in Hearthstone is Secret Hunter. And yeah, it's not a competitively viable deck. It's not going to get me to Legend or anything like that, but it's really fun to play. So when you're playing Hearthstone, the most important thing is that you have fun, right? Unless you're a pro player, the most important thing for the other 99% of us out there is to have fun with the game. And this is a card that will definitely make a lot of fun games of Hearthstone. So even though it may not be competitively viable, I think it's really cool. Moving on, Possessed Villager. That art is just like awesome to begin with, right? But it's a 1/1 for 1 Death Rattle, summon a 1/1 Shadow Beast. So essentially you get, 2/2 for 1 mana, kind of like a little bit of a cheaper, weaker Haunted Creeper kind of thing. But again, in aggro Warlock decks, I think this is it's a pretty good card. I think it's something that is worth giving a try, because again, with something like Zulak, you want to keep minions out there to build the board so that you can use stuff like Defender of Argus, other things to buff those minions. So yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's just a neat little tempo-oriented Warlock card for turn 1. I'm not sure if it really still is better than like Flame Imp or Voidwalker, you know, or even something like Leper Gnome if we're talking about something really aggressive coming out of Warlock. But it is cool, and I like Warlock getting more cheap options, you know? It's neat. So, yeah, kind of a cool little card. I might try it out. I still kind of like Warlock's other 1-mana options a little bit better, but it's interesting. It's not bad. Just might not be good enough, you know? We'll see. Moving on, another Warlock spell, Spreading Madness. Deal 9 damage randomly split among all characters. Well, this is a bit crazy, isn't it? It's cheap. It's a way to have a decent board clear early on, a way to do some decent damage to your opponent, theoretically. I have dreams of building a spell damage centric Warlock deck, and this could potentially fit inside of it. And I know Malygos Warlock exists already, but I'm talking about something like more very, very spell oriented with very few minions. I love the kind of straight up pure direct damage decks that you see in other card games, so I've always tried to do that in Hearthstone. Way back in the first week of closed beta, I made Freeze Mage because I wanted to, not because I thought the freezing concept was great, and it was, I knew it was strong, but the reason I made the deck is because I felt that it was the closest I could come to a pure direct damage deck in Hearthstone at the time, and ended up being pretty cool. So yeah, I'm hoping that that option exists for other classes too, and I don't think this card's going to give it to Warlock necessarily, but if I was building a spell damage deck with Warlock, I'd probably include this just because it's kind of crazy and fun. I don't think it's super competitively viable, but it could be good. You know, again, you could do all 9 damage to yourself too, so it could be bad. But it's a card that's worth playing around with anyway. You know, in a control style deck, it's worth experimenting with, I think. Either way, it's interesting. Fits the Warlock class mentality, so I think it's a good addition to the set. Yeah. Moving on to Warrior cards. Warrior, my favorite class. One for a 1/1, N'Zoth's First Mate. It's a pirate. Battlecry, equip a 1/3 Rusty Hook. I think this card is really good. If you're talking about an aggressive warrior deck, which is my favorite way to play Hearthstone, this is going to be a great card for this. I don't know if Pirate Warrior is definitely, you know, necessarily going to be a thing, but, you know, pirate or not, this guy seems pretty good. To get a weapon right off the bat, to get a 1/1 on the board, seems like a very solid card. And if you pair this with stuff like Upgrade, maybe for 1 mana, turn it into a 2/4, turn the weapon into a 2/4 rather, I think it's a card that could gain a lot of synergy. I think if you're playing Face Warrior, you definitely want to put 2 of these guys in there and mulligan for it, because getting a weapon, even if it's a cheap 1/3 weapon right off the bat on turn 1, is great for Face Warrior, because more than anything, you need to get that damage done ASAP with weapons, with minions, with Face Warriors. So yeah, it's exciting. It's an exciting card. As far as other stuff goes, if you're looking for more of a board control kind of warrior deck, this card might not be that bad either, because it gives you a way to clear your opponent's early minions with your weapon, or at least pop a Divine Shield, or have a 1/1 to trade into something. So I think in general it's just a strong 1 mana drop for warrior, and it fills kind of a gap in warrior minion-wise that has existed for a long time. So yeah, I think it's a great card. Very cool warrior card. Tentacles for Arms. When I first saw this card, I'm like, oh man, this card is terrible. 5 mana for a 2/2 weapon. Comes way late in the game. It's not that great. Death Rattle, return this card to your hand, which is interesting. Then you have to pay 5 mana to play it again, and it just seems bad. But I was at APAC at the time, and I was talking to Brian Kibler about it, and immediately, because this guy is way smarter than me about anything card game related, was like, no, think about this card in a control deck. Think about this card in a Fatigue Warrior deck, right? You'd run maybe 1 of these, maybe 2, probably 1. This is essentially a weapon that will never go away, and it's a way for warrior late game in a fatigue situation to get a consistent 2 damage every turn that will never go away, because as soon as this weapon dies, you can just bring it right back again. So in a fatigue warrior kind of situation, I think I would absolutely include 1 of these in there, because even though it's not a ton of damage, the fact that it consistently comes back is a way for Warrior to maybe get a little bit of an edge or more of an edge in a game type that Warrior is already pretty strong in because of all the armor that's gained in a Fatigue Warrior situation. So I think it's, looking back on it, I think it's a card that will only see very specific uses, but in that specific use, in that super late game situation, this card could be very, very strong. So yeah, it's neat. I like it. Moving on, 3 mana. Speaking of cards I really like, 3 mana for 3/3 Ravaging Ghoul. Battlecry, deal 1 damage to all other minions. That's neat. And the reason it's neat is because ever since Hearthstone came out, ever since the early days of beta, one of the decks that I've always wanted to make and always wanted to make work is a viable mid-range and rage-centric deck. So, and the problem is that you have not as many options as you would like to control when the enrage effects happen, and the enraged minions in Warrior are generally always about 1 health away from being, you know, really useful, right? Because when they take that damage, when they enrage, they become very, very fragile. And so it's never really been a deck archetype that's worked. But maybe with this kind of deck, maybe where you can get another 3/3 on the board, you have a way to set off that enrage yourself. It's something that could work a little bit more. So once again, like I do every expansion, I'm going to be trying to build a Enraged Warrior deck with this kind of thing. I'm definitely going to include Axe Flinger in it, of course, too, and because I love Axe Flinger. So I don't know. It's a deck archetype I'm going to experiment with because I always do. May not work, but it's certainly going to be a good card in something that augments the existing mid-range Patron Warrior decks, obviously. But I'm hoping it's going to get a little bit more traction for the Enraged decks too. We'll see. It's a minion that fits very well in with what Warrior already does, and might add some more options. We'll see. I have a YouTube video going with all the in music. I've got like a weird, like a creepy in song now. I can't remember where in the game it's from. Oh no, it's an advertisement. Mute, skip. Oh, we're done with the tavern soundtracks thing. Hold on, we'll start it again. There we go. Wonderful. There we go. Oh, what? Is it? It's not playing. There we go. Okay, I like to have a little bit of background music. Whatever. It's a long video. Doesn't matter if I take a break. We've been talking about a lot of cards. There we go. Okay, so that also means this video is already 47 minutes long. Man, this is a long one. I apologize. I'll get back to fast ones after this. 3 mana. 3 mana, Blood Warriors. Add a copy of each damaged friendly minion to your hand. Again, something that synergizes with what we were just talking about. So this is going to be something that I hope synergizes with Enrage-centric decks. It's going to be something that I hope synergizes with the current existing mid-range Patron-type lists. Seems good. It even seems good in something like a Control Warrior, honestly. If you can play some of those minions, and I mean immediately I'm thinking of Shield Maiden, but that's going to be gone from Standard. But other stuff too. I mean, if Gromosh happens to live a turn, you could even copy him. So it's a card that could theoretically see a lot of use. And I think it's going to be a card that's probably going to be pretty good. Because again, it's a card that's mitigatable, right? So maybe you run 1, maybe 2, depending on the situation. But an exciting card either way. Let's move on to the neutral minions. Faceless Shambler. And you know what? Actually, this video is really long. I'm going to cut it right here and do 2 videos instead. One where I do the class ones, one where I do the neutral ones. So, I'm going to stop the video right here. But I'm going to be right back with another video. Just want to split it up into 2. So, thanks for watching, guys. The neutral minion video will be coming out at the same time. So you can just click over and watch that right now. But, yeah, thanks for watching this one. And see you in the next video.